Please go ahead.
Good morning, Laurie. This is, it's lovely talking to you. You're in New York and I'm in New Delhi, but the book that brings us together is this one. Your cover is different, Laurie, I saw, but this is the cover.
This is the American cover.
Okay, that's, I think, published by Echo in America. In
right.
India, it's published by Bloomsbury.
Right.
Interestingly, Bloomsbury UK is publishing a book I'm co-editing, which will appear next year. But anyway, let's not talk about my book. You have a much more interesting life, as I could see. You've done so many different things in one life, let's talk about you. You came from Cornell University to New York, and you've mentioned your life in details on your website. But can you, for our viewers, can you just talk about how your life took off and how did you get interested in food?
Sure. So you're right. I graduated from Cornell University about 25 years ago and came right to New York City. Not really sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved to write and that I loved to cook. And so my hope was to figure out a way to put those two things together and be able to support myself. I worked as a private cook. And then I went to culinary school in New York City at a school called the French Culinary Institute, which unfortunately has just closed after many years. The pandemic has had a lot of
the victims, the COVID victims.
Yes. So from there, I worked for many years as the assistant to Chef Mario Batali, who was very well known as an author, restaurateur, and television presence. And he was the one who introduced me to Anthony Bourdain, or Tony Bourdain, as I like to call him. Right. I helped him with his first cookbook, which was called Anthony Bourdain's Leal Cookbook. I did recipe editing and testing. And really from the moment that I got to New York and worked as a private cook, I really never stopped working in that intersection of food and writing. And I've been very, very lucky throughout my time here to be able to find great people to work with, people who trust me. I've worked as a magazine editor. I've worked as a private cook. I've worked as a catering cook. And from starting in 2009, I became the assistant to Anthony Bourdain.
Yes. So now tell me, when you met Anthony, whom you call Tony, and of course, you have known him better than I think most of us. When you met him in 2009, what was it like? You were, of course, it was your first meeting with him. What was it like? And you also talk about his, that there was always he was a little disturbed inside his heart, and you always sensed it. But let's come to that a little later. But what were your first impressions, or what was your first meeting like?
Well, so I first met him actually in 2002, because that was when I was hired to help with his first cookbook. And I found him to be a tremendously generous person, a very efficient person. Most of what we did together was over email, but the few times that we did meet, he was warm and wonderful and generous with his time, generous with compensation, and also very careful to give credit to the other people who helped him do whatever project he was doing. He was not someone who sort of kept the spotlight for himself. He appreciated the support and the good work of the people around him. So when I decided to be his assistant in 2009, I already had a sense of who he was. And again, we didn't see each other in person all that often because he was traveling so frequently for television, and I had a new baby at home. So I was home working in New York, and he was out all over the world. But there was a trust that we had in each other from having worked together in 2002. And it was just immediately very comfortable for me.
So how did you keep in touch? Of course, there was no Zoom or Cisco WebEx at that time, but there was Skype, definitely. How did you keep this long distance creative communication on?
It was mostly by email. I don't want to say emails old fashioned because I'm old enough to remember a time when we didn't have email, but to me, it feels slightly old fashioned. So it was daily emails, occasional text messages. And then we would see each other once in a while when he was in New York and there was some reason to hand off something in person, or oftentimes he would be doing a speaking event or something in New York that I would go just to be able to touch base with him. So it was largely a written correspondence, which really suited me, and I think really suited him as well.
But reading your book, World Travel and Irreverent Guide, I sort of felt that you really soaked up what he thought and what he felt, and considering that, and you of course write preface about how lonely it is to write without your co-author, because you wrote it after, unfortunately, he passed away. Sort of, how did you sort of get into his mind? Sometimes, he would be in Kenya and you would be here in New York, or, you would be in India. In fact, I read, the first thing I read was his bits on Bombay, because I thought they really captured the essence of the city, and that bit about when he writes that he expected to see a whole lot of people dancing on the streets and he didn't find anyone, those are interesting bits. But how do you, of course, you did a lot of research, and that shows in the book. How did you sort of get into his mind and understand him?
Well, having worked together for so long, I felt that I had a deep base of understanding of who he was and what his voice was. We had also collaborated on an earlier book called Appetites, a cookbook, and that was published in 2016. So I knew what it was like to collaborate with him in life. And throughout the years, I had the opportunity to help him edit some writing, or I did a little bit of ghost writing for him. So I started with an understanding of how he wrote and what his voice was. And then I had the enormous privilege of having access to all of the transcripts from all of the television shows that he made over the course of nearly 20 years. And I have very good relationships with the people who helped him make television. So if I had questions or I wanted to get a second opinion, I had a lot of very willing collaborators and people who oftentimes had been on the ground with him in various places and could say what happened, what he really loved, and confirm locations and dates and things. So I had a lot of support. Of course, nothing compares to writing it with a living co-author, and it was absolutely a difficult and emotionally complex process, but I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to do it and to work through some of those feelings by doing the work.
In fact, you mentioned W. Kamau Bell, and we because his name rings a bell literally because of the CNN documentary series that that was just aired, and we all got to see it, and so who are the people who helped you, in the journey of writing this book? Like, who were the producers, or who were his like co-workers? You also mentioned his brother who sort of helped you. Tell a little bit of these people who sort of who were your supporting cast, really, in writing this book.
So Tony's brother Christopher has
what does he do, by the way?
He is an international banker. So very different from his brother. He's a wonderful person. I really didn't know him very well before Tony died, and I've gotten the chance to get to know him in the aftermath, and he has been a wonderful source of information and support. He has written 3 essays for World Travel about his memories and his experiences of traveling with Tony. There's one about the childhood trip to France. There's an essay about the state of New Jersey, where the family would spend a lot of time in the summers, and where, of course, they grew up just across the river from New York City. And then there's an essay about Uruguay in South America, where the family has roots. So Christopher has been, a huge source of support through all of this. There was also an essay from a producer named Nari Kai, who is
Yes, exactly. I
Greek
was about to
American.
come to him. Yes, yes. Yeah, please go on.
And she just gave some wonderful memories of making 2 episodes in South Korea with Tony. Now, she was born in South Korea and came to the United States when she was about 4 or 5 years old. And in the process of making these shows and working with Tony, she came to have a deeper understanding of her own cultural roots and a real pride in it, which when she was a kid, she talks about how she tried very hard to just become American and sort of to leave her roots behind. And through working with Tony, she came to understand how important her roots were and how meaningful it was. And she has now a huge sense of cultural pride and is working to share that with people. We also have a great essay from Vidya Balachandar, who is from India. I met her when she was living and working in Sri Lanka, and she now lives in Dubai. And she spoke beautifully about the difference between the south part of Sri Lanka and the north, which those 2 places were cut off from each other during the long civil war there. And she talks about the food and the understanding of the food and how the culinary traditions have been sort of put on hold for a long time because of the war, and how people are just starting to share those things with other people, and as the country continues to open up.
Right, exactly. In fact, the Sri Lanka really, was not known to the world. The northern part of Sri Lanka, which was actually where Jaffna was located, and Jaffna was at the epicenter of the war. And Jaffna has such a rich cuisine, influenced by the Tamil cuisine, which is, of course, Tamil Nadu is from India, and most of the settlers in Jaffna are from Tamil Nadu, as you know well. And that bit has come out so well. And in fact, these are the parts I was looking for to understand how authentic the book is. And let me tell you, this book is really a guide for anyone, and I would recommend it highly to everyone. I mean, people who view this program, I will, because there are things, say about the Bhendi Bazaar in Mumbai, which I know for a fact, but I've never read any Indian writer writing about it. I guess it always helps to see a country with a pair of foreign eyes, as it were. And so tell me something about how easily Anthony Bourdain used to integrate in and understand the society. I mean, how did he soak up so much information in such little time? I mean, because he was traveling a lot. I mean, his frequent flyer mileage must have been quite huge, humongous.
Amazing number of frequent flyer miles.
Yeah. So how did he soak up all this information?
Well, he was, from a very young age, was a voracious reader and just was so interested in world cultures, world cuisines, world history, and was constantly reading. Long before he became a published author, he was just someone who had such a thirst for knowledge. And that definitely carried over when he started making television. So he would read extensively about a place, not only the history and the cultural information, but he also would often read the fiction that was written by the people who live in the place to truly understand what their lives were like on a more granular level. He also, as I said before, he had people working with him, producers and directors who, were just the top notch and were very, very meticulous in their research. So they would prepare him. In addition to the research he did on his own, he would be deeply prepared with knowledge of a place that he went into. And I think that they always, as a team, made a big effort to go beyond the very obvious attractions of a place. Not that they would always ignore them. You'll see in the Japan chapter, I mean, some of the most beloved and well-known things in Tokyo are in the book. And this was raised as a question by the New York Times. Why would you include a robot restaurant and the Park Hyatt Tokyo and these very sort of obvious signifiers of Tokyo? And the truth is, these are the things that Tony loved. He also loved a very obscure ramen place or a sushi place, but these were the things that had an emotional resonance for him. So
that's right. And also, he went to this Kyoto place with, which gives some really, out of the world food experience. I mean, can you describe that a bit? Like what was it like?
Well, Kyoto is such a specific a place that one place that he really loved that we had actually hoped to initially include in the book, and that unfortunately he didn't get a chance to write. There was an onsen that he really loved. That was
what's an onsen? That's just for the clarity.
It's sort of a resort. It's a high-end resort place that has baths, Japanese style baths, which have, of course, their own rituals and ways of doing things. So it's sort of it's an all-inclusive resort, as it were, but very quiet and very private. So there are living quarters, there are private baths that are heated, thermal, beautiful baths, and then there is a meal ritual, a very regimented, there are certain clothing that you wear. You're served in your room a many multi-course meal served in a very traditional way. So it's this immersive experience of being taken care of bathing and relaxing, and then being fed this beautiful meal. And I think in this case, in this specific place that he loved, there's also after dinner entertainment with musicians and people who are there to to socialize with you.
Okay, great. So it was really, as you said, an immersive experience, and it was not just about eating. It was about an entire, like days of really being pampered, sort of, in a way. So one thing that I've always admired about Anthony Bourdain, his ability to be at one time to be quite harsh, and and at the other time to be quite sensitive. Sort of he's he comes across as if almost like a split personality. But he really, from his understanding of such different countries, that he's basically a sensitive soul. But sometimes he can be quite cutting and quite, so how did he balance, or was it purely for the television cameras that he put on that act? What was it?
I think
I hate to say it, but like we used to be told, long time back before Fox News became as notorious as it is now, we used to be told that how by colleagues who were being trained by Fox News to launch an Indian TV channel, how they were trained to be aggressive and brash and ultra conservative and all that, So was there something about Tony Bourdain which sort of made him, carry these two things? Was he doing it for television, or was he a very unpredictable person,
I think that he was always a storyteller and always someone who loved to speak hyperbolically. He knew how to get a laugh. He really understood sort of the rhythms of comedy and storytelling. And so I think that brashness and that, sometimes could be harshness, I think that was very authentic to who he was. Did he perhaps amp it up a bit for television? Sure. I think you see what works and what people really respond to and what's working, and then you try and do that. But I don't think it was inauthentic to who he was. He was a very keen observer of things, and he knew what he liked and he knew what he didn't like, and he wasn't afraid to be very honest about that. At the same time, you can see it in the television work, you can see it in his writing. He was a very sensitive soul. He was an artist, he was a writer, he was someone who had secret, not so secret dreams of being a musician. He was a father and a husband, and so he definitely had that sensitive side. He was absolutely a romantic, and as much as he could sort of be harsh for effect, he could also be incredibly tender and incredibly generous and very, very sensitive. So I think that duality really, both of those sides are completely authentic to who he was, and it really depended on the situation and what the landscape called for in that moment.
Right. And so, as you said that, reading, he was a voracious reader and a gifted storyteller, of course. what made him become a cook, sort of in the first place? And, why did he make that? That was his first career choice,
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't he go into writing, for instance?
Well, I think that my understanding from reading his books and talking to him is that he really was a little bit directionless. He was a young man who just wanted to figure out a way in the world. He wasn't academically rigorous. He's very, very smart, but just wasn't really interested in applying himself to the demands of academia. He was a very average or below average college student. And then he spent one summer in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is a resort town on the Atlantic Ocean. And he saw that you could make a living. If you had a little bit of skill in a kitchen, you could make some decent money and you could have a lot of fun, be around like-minded people. Of course, there was free-flowing alcohol, a lot of social camaraderie. It suited his lifestyle where he could lay on the beach and get a tan all day and then go to work at night and make some cash. So I think it was the entire lifestyle really appealed to him. And I think he saw a place for himself. As far as not pursuing a path of writing, I think, I can only sort of speak for myself and project, but it is very difficult to make a living as a writer. It's something that many people try and many people fail at. And so I think it's always wise to have a backup plan and to have a set of skills that will return dividends if the writing thing doesn't work out. And so he that's what he did for a very long time until he was able to be successful as a writer.
Yeah, that's right. And I thought it's only in India that people who write are poor, but and only some writers are lucky enough to be super rich and who do very well and become very famous. But yeah, I guess all over the world writers have to struggle, and I'm sure Tony Bourdain must have struggled with his first book. But after that, of course, it was he became the celebrity that he was.
Yeah, well, he wrote two novels. He wrote and published two novels before Kitchen Confidential, and neither one of them did very well at all.
Oh,
Of
really?
course,
Okay.
yeah, he had two crime novels. And so after Kitchen Confidential came out and he became so famous, those novels then did well. But initially they were not terribly well received, and they're quite good and funny and very quick and enjoyable reading, but he just didn't break through in the marketplace until Kitchen Confidential.
Well, very interesting. Okay, so that's something interesting. I mean, I didn't know about that. That he, obviously he chose the right, path of writing, and it almost reminds you of Dan Brown. That his first two novels were sort of not really noticed till his novel that did so well, became an international bestseller, and then the previous two came into the limelight. But one thing that I, as a wine lover, I keep, and you, of course, you have been an editor with Wine Spectator. And I see a lot of wine in, what he calls liquid food, in Tony Bourdain's books and in his writing and in his programs. What? Tell me something about his love for not wine and other alcoholic beverages.
Well, I think he was someone who understood the pleasure of the table, and of course that includes wine or cocktails or beer or whatever the occasion calls for. And I think he understood the value of wine and of wine making. Now, that being said, he always was very careful to say, I'm not a wine expert. I know what I know a little bit. And he probably, to be fair, he probably knew more than the average person, but he was always very modest about his body of knowledge. And I think there are some people obviously who know a tremendous amount about wine and it's their whole lives. And he always would defer to other people at the table. If somebody would hand him the wine list, he would say, you know what, don't let me choose. You go ahead and choose. I think he had the kind of working knowledge that a chef needs to have as far as what's on offer at this restaurant, what are the general wine categories that complement our food well, and the principles of wine and food pairing. His own preference was, especially in the later years, was for very simple, rough Italian country wines. And I think it makes sense. Those wines go very well with the kinds of foods that he loved, which were Sardinian pastas and Roman pastas and hearty braised meats. But I think he also was somebody who understood to sort of read the room, depending on where he was, and to drink what the locals are drinking. So in South Korea, that was endless shots of soju. In Japan, it was sake and beer. There were many places where alcohol was not part of the culture, and so they would go dry for 2 weeks shooting in Iran or other places like that. So it really was about what does the local culture call for, and how can I graciously accept that and participate in the rituals of the table.
That's right. You also from the book, what were your 5 favorite destinations? If you were to list them, and what were the bits that really excited you while you were writing them?
Well, I was very lucky to travel with Tony a number of times in the last several years. So I have a real soft spot for Vietnam, because that was my first travel with Tony and the crew. And that was in 2014. It was my first time on the ground in Asia. And Vietnam was a country that held such a special appeal for Tony as well. It was one of the first places he traveled to when he first began making television. And it was a place that he knew a lot about because of the U.S. involvement in politics there. He had read extensively. And so for me to see this place for the first time with Tony, who loved it so dearly and had such a deep understanding of it, was truly special. I rode on the back of the scooter with Tony. Anytime they weren't shooting him for the show, there was an extra helmet, and I got to ride around the streets of Hue with him. So that was fantastic. Japan. I went to Japan twice with Tony, and then I went back on my own, excuse me, with him. And again, a place that he loved deeply, he returned to again and again, had a deep knowledge of, but also knew that he was only ever going to scratch the surface, and that there was so much for him to learn there. We went to Tokyo. We rode the train from Kanazawa in the Northwest down to Tokyo, and to arrive in Tokyo Station, which is massive and overwhelming, and to have our hotel driver meet us at the door of the train and escort us through this incredible station and drive us to the Park Hyatt was truly just amazing. And he was so happy. Sri Lanka, I went with him there in 2017 and took that train ride from Colombo up to Jaffna, which was just incredible. A 10-hour ride. It happened to be a day where there was flooding in Colombo. So we were sort of leaving this rain-soaked city and seeing sort of the after effects of that, and going farther and farther north, and just to see the countryside open up, and to be in a place that 10 years prior, Tony had visited Sri Lanka, I think in 2008, and the country was in a very different place. So it was really hopeful and really special to see what had changed from in those 10 years. And I also had distant family by marriage living in Colombo. And so I was able to meet people who were related to me by marriage and learn to cook with them, which was an extraordinary experience.
And they are Sinhalese or?
Sinhalese, yes.
Okay,
yes.
right.
But originally from, maybe not, actually, I'm not sure about that. Originally from the Maldives, but a number of the family members had moved to Kandy and Colombo for education.
Yes.
And I met a tremendous number of really interesting and very friendly and open people in Sri Lanka, and it was wonderful. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I haven't yet been to India. We were so close being in Sri Lanka, but we just didn't. We didn't have the time to make it over. So I'm hoping to make it there soon.
Right.
I really loved working on the New York chapter. I've lived in New York for 25 years. I consider it my home. My son was born here, and Tony loved it and considered it his home as well. So the New York chapter is wide ranging. It's one of the longest chapters in the book.
That's right.
And in New York contains multitudes. So there's a lot of, there's actually a Sri Lankan restaurant in the New York chapter, as well as a lot of very classic New York restaurants and kind of everything in between. So that's 4. And 5 is Lyon, France, where I did travel for research for this book after Tony died, just to really get a sense of how Lyon was different from Paris and the deep, deep culinary traditions that are there. And it was just magnificent. So, but, you know, every one of these chapters, I learned something by doing the research and rereading the notes. And so I'm hoping that people feel the same way when they read the book.
Yeah, you know, because reading the book, you'll always feel that as if you went to all of the places yourself, you know. So, I mean, again, you know, bringing back, you know, as a writer, I'm very interested in knowing about how do you get into your, you know, I'm asking this again, I asked this at the beginning also, how do you get into your, you know, your sort of subject's mind? And in this case, the center of it is Tony Bourdain. You know, were there times when you thought you did not understand him, or you sort of, you know, you needed to clarify, but he wasn't physically around you to help you clarify some doubts? How do you go about it? How do you resolve those doubts?
Sure. Yeah, there were definitely those moments. You know, it was especially in the early months after his death. It took some time to really fully accept that he was gone, and there would be times where I would just think, oh, I have a question. Oh, I'll just email Tony, you know, and then I'd have to stop myself and say, well, you're not going to get a reply. Fortunately, you know, as I said earlier, I have really good relationships with the people that worked with him, not only the television producers, but also his agent and the people who published books with him. And so I had people around who also were very familiar with his way of thinking and with facts. And so I could talk to his literary agent, who became my literary agent. And she is someone who worked with him from the very early parts of his publishing career. And so probably better than anyone, you know, she could answer a question that truly only Tony could be able to answer. So it was leaning on my community and digging into my own deep knowledge of Tony from all of those years of corresponding and knowing each other and working together, and just having some faith that I was making a good decision, that I had been trusted to do this book, that he had trusted me to write an earlier book with him, and that I would have to make a decision based on my own knowledge and just hope for the best.
How many countries did Tony Bourdain visit in his life?
I believe it was 81 or 82 at the last count. It's and some of them he went back to many, many times.
Many times, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, over the course of, I'd say 18 years, traveling 250 days a year. I mean, that's just a tremendous amount of travel.
How did he cope with it? Did you ever ask him, you know? Because I mean, if I ever travel for more than 3 days in a month, I feel like, you know, I need to rest for 5 days, you know? How did he manage it?
I think he was very smart about protecting his time. When he was home in New York, it was he was very smart about trying to, you know, get rest at reasonable hours, do very little, catch up on just the sitting still that he was missing. And I think as the years went on, he was also more and more protective of his time when he was traveling, when he was shooting, and the crew became more and more sensitive to that. So there were lots of built-in breaks, and there were buffer days on the ends of each episode so that he wasn't getting completely burned out. And I think he also became very, very skilled at sleeping on planes. He would talk about how the minute that the engine started and the plane started rolling down the runway, he just had a sort of Pavlovian response, and he would just fall asleep. So I think he was able to sleep where he could, and to just make sure everyone knew that there were boundaries around his time.
That's fantastic, because, you know, I always envy people who can sleep in planes, you know, because I've not been able to do that very successfully. Now, you know, you talk about you tell us a little more about New York's dining culture, because that's always been, you know, this is something which always interests us, you know. And I've been to New York when I was a student many, many years ago, you know. I'm talking about 1988, So,
Mm.
and of course, I've been there many times, but it's not the same as visiting restaurants when you're a student,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and so. How has the dining culture of New York evolved? Because that is, very important part of your book, and how much of it gets reflected in the book. And one thing which matters a lot to India today, because of the COVID crisis that the country is facing. And I'm very happy to say that our two partners in Tiffin Talks, they're actually working with the COVID crisis team, and supplying oxygen where it's needed, and doing all sorts of good things that people should do at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Given the situation that you were in last year, how has the dining scene changed? So I have two questions. That one is, just like for an outsider, explain New York's dining scene and the richness of it.
Mm.
You're talking about the Sri Lankan restaurant. I remember, I first ate Ethiopian food in New York, of all the places in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, of course, how did COVID impact the restaurant industry? Because it was seriously impacted. And
Yeah.
now the problem is that no one wants to go back to work in restaurants. So,
Mm-hmm.
can you
Mm-hmm.
just talk about New York's
Sure.
scene in the perspective, and talk as
Sure.
much as you can.
Sure. So, yeah, New York has an incredible world-class dining scene, and there is everything from extremely high-end fine dining to hot dog carts and everything in between. We may not have the best of every type of cuisine, but it is at least represented here. I know there are places in the United States that have a deeper and more diverse Vietnamese cuisine than we do in New York, but we do have a lot of Vietnamese restaurants.
Yes.
There are temples of fine dining, fewer and fewer these days, but there are still these temples of fine dining that have remained and that have endured over many decades of fashions coming and going. And then we have a whole mid-level of just beautiful restaurants where you're not spending your
Sorry
entire
to jump in,
paycheck.
but I have to ask this question. Did you talking about these temples of fine dining? How we know about 11 Madison Park.
Mm-hmm.
How did it impact these places? How did the COVID crisis impact these places?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's had a serious impact on those
Mm-hmm.
places. I think that the kind of experience that you have in a fine dining restaurant like per se, like 11 Madison Park, these things, they don't translate to the takeout culture and the delivery culture. So I think a
That's
lot
right.
of them just simply went dark for a number of months or even up to a year. The most sort of creative and resourceful among them were able to figure out ways to continue to generate some revenue with kits, dining kits, where a diner will get maybe a piece of meat and a side dish and some instructions, and it's something they do at home. Or places were making sauces or different pieces of merchandise that could translate to the COVID landscape. But yeah, a number of them have closed. I mean, Thomas Keller, who has Per Se, which is arguably one of the top dining destinations in New York, he had another restaurant in the Hudson Yards development, which is a brand new, very high profile real estate and retail development on the west side of Manhattan. And that restaurant, I think, was only open for a year, and it was called the TK Rooms. Beautiful, very elegant, very classic, old school fine dining, and they just couldn't sustain themselves through the pandemic.
That's right.
So fine dining was already in a bit of an identity crisis before COVID came along. People wanted to have maybe a more dynamic, livelier, louder, more fun and young experience than fine dining had come to represent. And so a lot of places were already sort of changing the way that they did business. And I don't think fine dining will ever go away. I mean, there is certainly a swath of the population here that really wants that level of service, a quiet padded dining room, all of the flourishes that make something feel like a special occasion. And there's certainly people who can afford that, and that will continue to be the case. But so, yeah, the COVID crisis has had a very serious impact on the restaurant landscape here. There are many places that did not survive or have not yet opened back up. It was devastating for the people who work in restaurants. And now it is very difficult for restaurants to restaff, because when you've laid people off and they've been on unemployment for a year, or they've left the city, or they've joined other sectors of the workforce, I think it's difficult to come back to the restaurant business with so much uncertainty. And there was already kind of a labor crisis and a reckoning around what are the labor conditions, what is the pay? There's a big debate about tipped versus non-tipped work. And so all of these things were just exacerbated and accelerated by the COVID crisis. So we're in a state of flux right now, and it's unclear what the future will look like for restaurants.
But do you think is the age of fine dining coming to an end? Of course, you said there is a clientele which still, will it survive this crisis? And
I think it
or
will
take
survive.
a new direction.
Yeah, I think that there will always be an appetite for some level of fine dining. And I think maybe there will be fewer options, but I think there probably is a smaller clientele for that. As far as the future, I don't think there is one future. I think there are many futures for the state of the restaurant business. I've seen a lot of very, very talented chefs that have taken on their own businesses via selling food via Instagram or via other social media platforms, sort of cutting out the middleman and doing direct delivery or direct pickup of just baked goods. Or there's a man in my neighborhood who's a very talented chef who just makes pizzas with his wife a couple of times a week, and they deliver them. Now, of course, as things come back, there will be regulatory issues. There will be questions about how much does the city need to be involved in the regulation and taxation and health compliance of these things. It does have a bit of a Wild West feel right now in terms of what people are able to do. Restaurants are now selling takeaway cocktails and selling bottles of wine for delivery and pickup. And now these things were not allowed in pre-COVID times. And the outdoor dining scene is much bigger. It used to be very difficult to get a permit to have outdoor seating at a restaurant. And now every place has
website.
So it'll be interesting as the city kind of comes back and as we all recover, what the future will look like.
And I think now the weather is also becoming sunnier and brighter. So I'm sure a lot of people must be getting addicted to outdoor dining.
Yeah. I have a reservation myself tomorrow night at a place called Ernesto's. It's a Spanish restaurant, and I specifically requested outdoor dining, in part because I still feel that it's safer, but also because it's May in New York City. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to eat outdoors.
That's right. Coming back to your book, and you talk about I'd like to ask you about New York again. Which are the because I used to find them very interesting. Coming from India and seeing people selling food on the streets. I thought it only happened in India or in our part of the world. But when I saw it happening in New York, I said, well, some things are common to every culture. And so, tell me, which are the cart vendors in New York which are your favorites? Where would you go to have a hot dog from a cart?
I think the hot dogs are more or less all the same, but because I live in Queens, which is one of the outer boroughs, there's so much diversity in the street food. So I probably wouldn't choose a hot dog, but if I'm in Manhattan, or especially around Central Park and in Midtown, that's probably where I would get a hot dog. If not, Gray's Papaya, which is also mentioned in the book as it's a store, it's a brick and mortar store, but it's pretty much just a counter with hot dogs and tropical fruit drinks. In my neighborhood, there's an increasingly large population of people from Tibet and Nepal. And so there are a lot of carts selling momos. the steamed dumplings. And
That's
so
right.
there's one in my neighborhood. There are more trucks at this point than carts.
That's right.
So there's a wonderful truck in my neighborhood where I like to get momos. There are lots and lots of great taco carts. There's a very vibrant Mexican community in my neighborhood. So there are probably 5 carts that set up outside the main subway station.
Wow.
And
Okay.
generally, whomever has the shortest line is the one that I'll
Right.
go to, and they're excellent. And then there's another truck that sells specifically tacos from Tijuana,
Okay.
called birria, and so it's
Right.
a braised meat with a tomato consomme that you dip the tacos into. Really, really delicious.
Right.
So last night I was out walking in my neighborhood, and it's Eid. It's the last
Right.
night of Ramadan, and
Yes.
there were people out in the street. It was like a party. It was 10 at night, and it was like a wonderful party. There was music and lights and all kinds of carts. There was something called fuksa. Does that ring a
Okay.
bell?
Faluda? No.
No, it was.
No.
I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna butcher the name, but it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a bunch of fried stuff together, kind of crunchy fried stuff. And there was a
Okay.
huge line, and there were people. What is the ice cream? Halva? Halva?
Yeah.
No.
No. Kulfi.
Kulfi. Yes, yes,
Kulfi.
yes.
Kulfi
Sorry.
with Faluda. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So there were children eating kulfi, and it was
Right.
just I feel very, very lucky. The neighborhood that I live in has a rich, rich diversity of street food.
It's really like the United Nations of food there. Sort of it's really fun neighborhood, I'm sure, to be in. So you know, it is always, New York always has had this inclusive feeling. And, I remember talking about trucks. My first experience with food trucks was in Los Angeles. It was quite recently, not many years ago. And of course, later at San Francisco, where, I went to this really rough side of town where, the place had been converted into like a food truck park. And I realized that there's so much happening. Are chefs moving to food trucks? Are they finding it more like something which assures them their independence, and then they can sell the food they really want to?
Yeah, I think it's definitely in the last 10 years that has definitely been a trend, especially in large urban areas. It represents a smaller investment and a greater immediacy of being able to connect with customers. Now, of course, it's not for everyone, and there's no place to sit down, there's no place to wash your hands or use a bathroom, and so I don't think that food trucks will put regular dining out of business, but it definitely is another way for people to get in on the ground level of food entrepreneurship. If you don't, I think it also goes hand in hand with our corporate culture, where you may not have an hour or an hour and 20 minutes to sit down and have a meal in a restaurant, but you've got 30 minutes to walk down to the street, get your food and bring it back to your desk.
So you eat on the go, or eat in your office. And that's right. And I think it's happening now increasingly in all major urban centers all over the world. I think the corporate culture is really shrinking the amount of time we have for eating.
Yeah.
Well, that sort of very, it was very interesting to hear about Anthony Bourdain, to hear about New York City, which is your city. And so what's the next book about? Do you have one already in the works? What are you doing?
Yep. So the next book will come out in October of this year, and it's called Bourdain, The Definitive Oral Biography.
Okay.
And so that is a deeper telling of Tony Bourdain's story. I did about 95 interviews with people who knew him from all areas of his life. I spoke with his late mother, Gladys, before she died. I spoke, of course, with his brother, Christopher, with his young daughter, with people that he knew throughout his childhood, high school, and the little bit of college that he did. His friends and colleagues from kitchens all those years, and then of course his television and publishing colleagues and friends. So it's we know some of Tony's story through all of the stories he told about himself, And this is sort of another approach to his story. And I think that it will, for people who have questions about who he was and how he lived and what was in his heart and mind, I think that this book will start to answer some of those questions. I know I learned a lot about him by writing it.
Any particular, like I'm particularly interested in his brother because he seems to be belonging to another world altogether. Any interesting, experiences he shared with you, like a little sneak peek into your the forthcoming book?
Well, his brother was very, very forthcoming about the relationship that they had throughout the years, which was interesting because they were so different. They lived their lives, they spent their time in very different ways. So he talked a lot about that. And his brother shed a lot of light on the way that their childhood was, how their parents related to each other, the kinds of things that their family was interested in, the way that they spent their leisure time, how they spent their money even. I mean, he was very, very generous with those memories and insights, along with some really wonderful family photos. He was able to share with me, over 100 really funny and evocative and beautiful family photos. So I think that will shed a new light on a aspect of Tony Bourdain that a lot of people don't know about.
And given that he has a worldwide fan following, I can already see the number of people who like to have the book and keep it.
I hope so.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, you've done, you knew Tony Bourdain so well, and it's a question that all of us have. Why did he choose to end his life the way he did? Was there any clue to it? When he was around you or alive?
I mean, it's a very difficult thing to speculate about. And, I wasn't with him. And so it's very hard to get into another person's mind. All I can really say, and in the years of trying to understand and trying to process, is that he was as complex and sensitive a human being as anyone else. And I think that it was easy to look and say that he had the best life in the world and he had the best job in the world. And, how could someone, throw that all away? And, I don't really have the answer, but I think that all I can say is, what we see on the surface as far as someone's public output is only ever a fraction of what's truly going on in their heart and mind. So, I hope through this book, World Travel, that people will see the best and most positive sides of him, and how much, even though he was troubled, that he really loved life and he loved people. So, yeah.
Fantastic. In fact, that's what makes his life so interesting. I mean, I feel bad to say about it, but his end actually makes his entire life seem so interesting, and so meaningful. It's another ironic way of putting it, but but that's how I guess life is. It's always it always comes up with surprises. So, but anyway, thank you for spending so much time talking about the book, about Tony Bourdain, about New York City, and. I wish I could have you autograph it, but maybe you can send
next time you come to New York.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to, when flight restrictions are lifted and it becomes a COVID-free world, I'm sure we'll get together in person. But till then, all the best for your next book. The one good news from the world is book sales are going up thanks to COVID. Yes. As more and more people are staying at home, they're reading more. That's great news for us. So trying to make a living out of writing. Yes. So all the best, Laurie, and hope to see you in India. I mean, that's one country you should visit.
Yes.
And all the best again for your next book. Stay well. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.